What's going on, people? My name is Batman, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about the low playlist population crisis that is still plaguing the MCC. 343 actually reminds me of this pizza guy I had the displeasure of doing business with last night, alright? Now, your typical pizza guy has two jobs, alright? Number one, getting the pizza there on time, which both my pizza guy and 343 failed to do. Except whereas my pizza guy was half an hour late, 343 was 110 days late. Alright, now job number two. Pizza guy needs to bring a fucking pen to the front door so I can sign the goddamn receipt. Alright, this stupid motherfucker shows up late last night. Alright, half an hour late. Comes to the front door to give me my pizza. Shoves the receipt in my face and says, I don't have a pen. Well, I don't have a pen either, so what are we gonna do about this? I'm not the kind of guy who just has pens lying around. That shit is outdated. I haven't used a writing utensil in years. Even the stores around town have me sign with my finger on an iPad. So just to emphasize how pointless the entire system is, I draw a giant penis because it doesn't make a difference. They don't look at it. Nobody ever looks at it. I don't even know what it accomplishes. I don't even know what the point is. When I lived with my mom, I had a bunch of pens always lying around because people who were born pre-Y2K always have an excessive amount of pens lying around for some reason. But no, not me. I'm ready to move on, feet first, into the 21st century technologically. And if we have to leave stupid pen-dependent motherfuckers behind to do that, then so be it. Cut the cancer off to preserve the whole. So why don't you just give me my pizza and fuck off? So I tell him I don't have a pen, and we sit there in awkward silence for a few minutes. I implying that it's his job to solve the problem, and he twiddling his thumbs with his head stuck up his ass. And this is basically where we are with 343. They have delivered the pizza, but their job isn't done, and there's no indication they have any interest or are even capable of completing the delivery of the full MCC experience. The low playlist population situation has actually deteriorated significantly since my last video on this subject. A check of the Xbox Top Played page on March 26 revealed that the MCC is still struggling to break into and stay in the top 10 most played games on Xbox. Now, like last time, we don't have the exact numbers, but Halo is still behind Battlefield 4 at the time of this uploading, and just like last time, we can use the Battlefield4stats.com to determine what Battlefield's sitting at. And so what's really troubling this time around is that Hardline has come out, and that's cutting deep into Battlefield 4's population, and yet Battlefield 4 is still beating out the MCC most times of the day. So Battlefield 4 held spot number 8 today, and we know that Battlefield 4 was averaging, on the 26th, about 14k players, which is about half of what it was last time I covered this topic. So we can then deduce that the MCC must have been sitting somewhere below that number, hovering around a tragic 10k. To put that in perspective, a game that had its own horrible, controversial, and damaging launch that has been out for a year and a half and has now seen its sequel released is still beating out the MCC. This means that most playlists in the MCC probably aren't breaking 1k total players. Now, you can access this list for yourself by visiting the Xbox store and scrolling on over to the top played list. And these numbers will change. I'm sure more BF4 players are going to gradually make the jump over to Hardline. Maybe there will be a new playlist added to the MCC rotation, right? They'll take out Team Ball and put something else in there. Then we might see a spike that day or whatever. MCC probably will make the top 10 again. It's been going back. It's made the list, fallen off, made the list again. It's been going back and forth. The point isn't to determine a specific number, but just to emphasize generally that the MCC is hovering around 10k players. At best, it's got 20k on at peak times, which is very, very low. And again, it's lower than Battlefield 4, and that's a game that's been out for 18 months and has now seen its successor come out. And I've noticed a lot of resistance in the past few months, both to my very original Don't Pre-Order Halo 5 video back in December. I see a lot of people proudly proclaim in the comments, I will pre-order Halo 5, and you, Batman, are just a hater. If you don't like it, don't play it. And I want to clarify, I'm not anti-Halo. In fact, quite the opposite. I am pro-Halo. I want Halo to survive. That's the whole point. Something every Halo player needs to understand is that this is something we should all be able to agree on. This is an issue where both the anti-343 crowd and the pro-343 crowd should be united in a bipartisan way for a common cause, because at the end of the day, we are all pro-Halo, and for the next 6 to 8 months, we are stuck together on the same Halo game. And we have collectively a vested interest not only in doing our best to preserve or reattain the quality of the MCC, but in saving the franchise itself from the short-sighted, profit-driven decision-making process that is gradually decaying the Halo franchise itself. We need to pressure the Microsoft Game Development Department, aka 343, to reassess how a game is made and when it is released, how that game is supported, and how the community is communicated with. But the only way we can do that is if the Halo community itself consumes these Halo products and responds to the 343 PR differently. permanently, because right now we are playing right into that short-term profit-driven philosophy. Halo 4 was short-term profit-driven thinking. Let's take the best parts of Call of Duty and stick it in Halo, and hopefully people will like it, but they didn't like it. Not only did it fail to bring in any meaningful new amount of players, it alienated the Halo veteran community and damaged the franchise in the long run. Their decision to release the MCC when they obviously had to have known it was broken was short-term profit-driven thinking. It was about last year's Christmas sales for both the MCC and the X1. And in the short term, it delivered higher profits that quarter of that year for that game. But think about how much damage the franchise itself has suffered, how much of the fan base has been sacrificed, the damage to the Halo brand and to 343's reputation. And the way they've handled the launch from a PR standpoint, the silence, the vague updates that clarified nothing, the straight up slap in the face dishonesty when they say they didn't know it was broken before launch, and now they're moving right along with all their Halo 5 marketing and promotional activities as if nothing has happened. They took the Halo MCC sort of logo thumbnail. That's no longer on the front page of the Halo Waypoint website. It's no longer their Facebook profile picture. It is a thing of the past for them. And I talked about these things in the last video, but I'm not the first or the only person to recognize all the bullshit. They have alienated huge sections of the Halo community, and what's left are caught in a vicious, hateful conflict playing out across Reddit and Halo Waypoint and the YouTube comment sections. They are ignoring the wound because it's the most profitable thing to do. They don't want you thinking about the MCC at all anymore, because they aren't trying to sell the MCC anymore. They are trying to move pre-orders for Halo 5. They would much rather have you commit $60 to pre-order Halo 5 than to buy the MCC, and they don't want to invest any significant amount of time or energy into a game they are no longer interested in selling. They are cutting their losses financially in the short term, but at the cost of alienating and ultimately driving away huge portions of the fan base with each fuck-up. There are players who felt burned by the MCC and because of that are not interested in Halo 5, and they're not in the Waypoint forums or on Reddit. They are disengaged from the franchise in its entirety, and we can tell the MCC has had a detrimental effect on the franchise already just by looking at Halo 5 pre-orders. Now, people have been pointing to these pre-order numbers as a sign of strength because Halo is the most pre-ordered game on the market right now, and that means that Halo is doing just fine when that's just not true. The only reason it's the most pre-order title right now is because it's been available for pre-order for almost a year, while every other major title that will launch this fall isn't even available right now 6 months in advance. Halo 5 started taking pre-orders absurdly early, so right now, or as of the most recent update to VG charts at the end of the last month, it's sitting just under 200,000 total pre-orders. This is significantly lower than what Halo 4 had at a similar time before its launch, which is obviously on the exact same fall schedule. And Halo 4 had not been available for pre-order nearly as long. If they've shaved off this much of the hardcore Halo fans that typically pre-orders, what percentage of the more casual fan base has been turned off as well? And it's important to pay attention to this change. You see here, Halo 5 is only getting about 1,000 per week, whereas Halo 4 was bringing in 5,000 per week. That's a big difference and says a lot about how much interest there is in the franchise. And the super important thing to keep in mind here is that 100,000 of those Halo 5 pre-orders came before the MCC was even out. And in fact, this is the first time in history, or at least that I can think of, that a company made a game's sequel available for pre-order before making its predecessor available for pre-order. You could pre-order Halo 5 way before you could pre-order the MCC, which seems like a counterintuitive strategy on their part, unless their plan from the beginning was for the MCC to be a placeholder, a quick, easy way to spike cash flow in advance of H5. And in fact, I bet a lot of those Halo 5 pre-orders are from people who were expecting the MCC to be Halo 5 because you could pre-order Halo 5 before MCC was even announced. And whoever made the call to make H5 available so early is probably getting promotion right now because they successfully cushioned themselves from any blowback due to this egregious and incompetent launch. They have already guaranteed they're going to turn a profit on H5. Spending money on MCC hurts that profit margin, so they're abandoning the MCC, except in the most artificial sense. You know, they'll still rotate in new playlists every now and then they'll host, random H2C tournaments. They'll provide all the essentially free support they can, just so they can say they're supporting it. But that obviously won't be enough to repopulate the game. They know it would be too expensive to repair the psychological brand damage they've inflicted on so many MCC players. It would require significant investments of resources and energy and manpower to repair the damage done in those players' minds. They could bring those players back into the fold, but not at a profit, so they won't. They're doing their best to pretend it never happened, and some will forget and some will just want a new FPS shooter, and then they can bank on that for short-term profits, but sooner or later they will run out of bridges to burn. After the MCC's release, and after a huge 2-week promotional beta and all the advertising and gameplay we've seen across the internet, you would expect the pace of pre-orders to pick up dramatically from what it was before it was even being marketed, but that pace did not pick up. The launch of Halo, the Halo 5 beta, the entire Halo 5 marketing campaign that's been in full force since the day MCC launched, with those dozen half-hour-long episodes detailing its development and developer interviews and 343 competing in their own in-house Halo 5 tournaments, none of that did much to increase the rate of pre-orders, and that says a lot you'd expect that to have some effect on the amount of pre-orders that are being received by the game weekly, but it didn't. And I think that says a lot about how people feel about the franchise in general. Halo 5 is going to launch in a significantly diminished state when compared to the past, and this is entirely because decisions are being made with the goal of turning the highest possible profit in the short term, but at the ultimate cost of the franchise's long-term health. Now, to be fair, part of what's damaging Halo 5's numbers right now might just be the fact that most people hated Halo 4, but of course Halo 4 itself was another short-term thinking, profit-driven decision. Or it could be that Halo 5 itself just didn't resonate with people very well. Again, based on the beta stats that 343 released, we know that the average playtime per player was 2.5 hours. And this number seems especially pitiful when you consider that 1, this wasn't a free open beta to the world and to any average Joe who just wanted to try it out for shits and giggles. Everyone who played that beta had bought the MCC. They were Halo players. And even worse, this beta was running for 2 weeks straight. It was the longest beta I've ever seen. And in an entire 2 weeks, the average person only put in 2 hours? I wouldn't call that a success. And if Halo 5 does fall flat, it'll be because of Josh Holmes' short-term thinking. They aren't thinking about making a great Halo. They're thinking about how do we peel off chunks of COD's massive consumer base, so they implement people's favorite features from Call of Duty. It didn't work in Halo 4, so they're trying it again in Halo 5 with just a different set of COD mechanics this time, and it seems like once again it's not doing that well. It seems like they have no original ideas, and I'm not saying that Halo 5 is a COD clone, but the biggest innovative changes to Halo 5 and to Halo 4 before it were just copying mechanics from Call of Duty, period. There's no way around that. There's no disagreeing with that. That's fact. Sprint, ADS, kill streaks, custom classes. Those are the big, game changers that 343 has implemented into Halo. All they've done is copy Call of Duty mechanics and try to make it work in Halo. It's short-term, profit-driven thinking to peel off COD sales, and it's killing the franchise in the long run, and the numbers back that up. Now, this kind of short-term thinking can destroy a franchise. If we look at Medal of Honor, different franchise, different developer, but the same kind of short-term mentality. That game was marketed entirely on brand recognition, trying to milk its popularity from the past. It was rushed out and had a very poor, bug-riddled launch. The game itself was not received well by the fan base because all they did was copy and paste some fan favorite Call of Duty mechanics and put it in a Battlefield game. Player populations bottomed out rapidly, rendering the game unplayable before it had even been out for 6 months, and because of this mega fart of a game, interest in the franchise died out completely, and EA gave up on Medal of Honor in its entirety. They were very upfront about the fact they have no intention of making any more Medal of Honor games. And Halo is kind of on the same course, and for a lot of the same reasons. Now, Halo is a much bigger franchise than Medal of Honor, but that just means it's going to take longer to die. But it's obviously trending downward at this point, and the pre-order numbers confirm that. There are 2 factions in the Halo community, and we may feel differently about the direction of the Halo franchise. We may or may not hate Sprint. We may feel differently about the qualifications of 343. We may disagree strongly about how awesome the original trilogy was, but we should all agree that for the remainder of 2015, both camps have a vested interest in pushing for a healthier franchise, and of course, our more immediate concern, we both have a vested interest in making the most of the Master Chief Collection before its precious time in the limelight is concluded, and the glory of its full experience passes on to the Tales of Legend, never to be reclaimed again. The MCC launch has damaged the Halo brand, and sometimes that's not obvious for those of us hanging out on Reddit or Waypoint, but the only people still frequenting those types of Halo community hubs are the more die-hard Halo community members. They've done an excellent job of containing the damage and making sure it doesn't spread to other consumers, but what about the consumers they already screwed over? Consumers who feel burned. Most people gave up on the MCC entirely. That's why playlist populations are so low. When fall comes around and it's time to choose between Halo or one of those other major FPS franchises that will be launching at the same time, what percentage of those players who felt burned and gave up on the MCC are more likely to choose Halo 5 over one of its competitors? I'm not saying we can accurately assess the extent of the cultural and psychological damage the MCC launch has inflicted on the Halo franchise, the brand, and the community, but to pretend there's no damage or that the damage is contained just because that's what 343 is doing is naive. Those low pre-order numbers and the extremely low playlist populations on the MCC suggest a very deep, festering wound. Imagine Halo is a horse and its rider is a fat fuck named 343, but most people know him as Microsoft on account of his microscopic soft cock. This rider is riding from town to town across the country, putting on horse shows with his champion badass Halo horse. But he's only thinking about next week's profit. profits, never considering the horse's longevity. He buys the horse the cheapest food and he never gives it a chance to rest and heal. And on this last ride, the horse was showing troubling signs. It was limping and coughing up blood. But the rider 343 knew that it would cost him money to take a few months off to heal the horse, so instead he just pushed as hard as he could and rode as fast as he could to get to the next town on time. And wouldn't you know it, the horse got pushed too hard and collapsed and broke its leg. And the people at the town got a shitty horse show, but it didn't cost the rider any money because most of the townsfolk had paid in advance. Well, now the horse has a broken leg. 343 refuses to give it the medical care it needs because that shit is expensive. Instead, he's going to whip the horse to get off its ass and start sprinting for the next town to get there on time. The horse is malnourished, it is dying, but 343 just wants to make sure it gets to 2 more towns on time for maximum profits. And after reaching the town named Halo 6, if this horse should die, then so be it. He milked it for every penny it was worth. He made a lot of money and will consider it a huge success, and afterwards he can go find a new animal to abuse. I see people in the comment sections of my more controversial Halo videos accusing me of hating Halo and wanting to kill Halo, but that's just not true. I love Halo. I've loved Halo since I was 7 years old. The status quo is killing Halo, and if you fight to maintain that status quo, if you pre-order Halo 5, if you tell people to shut the fuck up when they are complaining about the MCC launch, you are fighting to uphold an untenable status quo that will ultimately destroy Halo. Now look, I realize that the last 2 videos I made on this topic have been divisive, and I know they are divisive because I read the comments, and if the video gains some traction on Reddit or Waypoint, I'll usually check out some of those comments too, and I apologize for that. Because so long as this just becomes an intra-community fight between 2 opposing camps of Halo players, it won't have enough power to turn the tide of the short-term, profit-driven thinking that is destroying Halo. We will not be able to force 343 to commit further resources in a significant way to this game in order to repopulate its servers and provide the true Halo experience, which will heal vast amounts of the psychological and cultural damage that the launch itself has inflicted on the community, and thus make the Halo franchise itself healthier and better in the long run. There has to be common cause here, and there should be. This isn't about hurting Halo 5, it never was. It's about saving the MCC from a premature demise brought on by low player populations, and if we can draw the red line here, if we can force them to commit resources to the game at the cost of their own profit margins, we can show them that the short-term thinking hurts their wallets, and the only way we can affect change is if we hit them in the fucking wallet. I'm sorry I was divisive in the earlier videos. It's because I was angry, because I've been disappointed so many times by so many games in such a brutal succession. And the MCC was the one game that I was sure could not disappoint, because I knew what was in it, and I knew I already loved what was in it, and I was so excited to finally have something positive to talk about on YouTube. And Halo is the only game my girlfriend likes, a game we played split screen together a lot back on Reach. And there's nothing more entertaining than playing your favorite game with your favorite person. Hours and hours of getting stoned and wrecking noobs in multi-team King of the fucking Hill clusterfucks on Sword Base. Going as far back as 2010, we were sophomores in high school. What joyous times these were! Full of laughter, love, happiness, and reckless abandon. And yet, in a rash and foolish decision, driven by my unquenchable lust to have the best gaming videos on YouTube, I sacrificed these times. I turned in my 360 and Reach for store credit at GameStop so that I could afford the Xbox One, and what a fool I was! For here I am, 2 years later, and I have yet to play a next-gen video game on my next-gen console. There was no Halo option, and so instead of celebratory nights of games and music and laughter and Halo, we binge-watched all 10 seasons of Friends on Netflix. In cold silence, my betrayal lingering between us like a burning elephant in the room. But then, a ray of light in an otherwise dark time. Halo, the Master Chief Collection, coming to Xbox One. At last, there was hope that Cece and I could reclaim the glory of our past festivities, and with heightened anticipation we waited. But alas, my dreams were dashed like a Targaryen baby against a wall. Launch came, and we tried to play, and a week later we tried to play again, and after every update we tried and tried and tried until at last she gave up, and began binge-watching all 6 seasons of Parks and Recreation. I was in a dark and angry place, and it was from this mindset that the original Don't Pre-Order Halo 5 video was born, and it was fueled by rage, and frankly, had I known these problems would have persisted for another 3 months after that, I would have been even angrier in that video. And I was mean, and I tore into not only 343, but Halo community members who did not hate 343, and I hit below the belt as often and as hard as I could, and ultimately, though I will never empathize with those who would defend 343 in regards to the MCC launch, I realized that we must lay down our arms and set aside our animosity if we are to come together in a glorious effort to save Halo. And it's not about hating Halo 5. It's just that not pre-ordering is the only real power we have. There are people who are paid to listen to us, but those are not the same people that are paid to make decisions. We need to get the attention of the decision makers, the shareholders and the CEOs who are looking at the numbers. We want them to feel uncomfortable when they look at those numbers. We want those numbers to be so low that the decision makers come to the community managers and on the very bottom of the rung of the hierarchy and they say, hey, why are these numbers so low? And if we're successful, the community managers will say, because people are pissed off about the shitty launch that subsequently caused extremely low playlist populations, which are causing lag and hopelessly mismatched ranks in-game and thus having a seriously adverse effect on people's enjoyment with the game. If the decision makers hear that, if we as a community can force 343 to understand that the best way to boost pre-orders or interest and excitement about Halo 5 in general is to take meaningful steps to repopulate the MCC, then we will see returns in the form of a more functional MCC and a more prosperous franchise with a much healthier outlook for its ultimate longevity and eternal glory. The only people who have anything to lose are those who would make a profit off this debacle, off of riding the Halo franchise into the ground for massive personal gain. Pre-ordering is what allowed them to turn a profit on the robbery that was the MCC launch. Pre-ordering is what has already guaranteed they won't suffer any meaningful consequences for their gross failure when Halo 5 drops, because with 200,000 pre-orders they already know they're going to turn a profit. The question for them is how large will that profit be? As far as they are concerned financially and in the short term, the MCC launch was a profitable success. And I say no more. Save MCC first. If you pre-order Halo 5, it's because you hate Halo and want it to die. This is the message we need to get across to anyone who has or will pre-order. If you pre-order Halo 5, it's because you hate it and want it to die. Buy it after it comes out if you want. I will not take a stand against that. I know I don't have that kind of power and none of us do. But we can stop the flow of pre-ordering. Damn it. We will make our final stand here, for this is our last opportunity, and the stakes have never been, and will never be, higher. If 343 emerges from this colossal failure unscathed and retaining these massive profits, then every developer for the foreseeable future will be viscerally aware that they can do whatever the fuck they want when they want, and if the PR is good enough and they open the game up to pre-orders early enough, they will turn a profit. If poor behavior is deemed profitable, then said poor behavior will continue in Halo and in gaming at large. Never has a launch been as bad as this. Never has a company turned a profit on such a debacle. For a failure such as this, no punishment is too great. We have to keep up the pressure. This was always going to be a sustained campaign because one video, one rant, one complaint gets lost in the void. 343's entire PR strategy has been to let the frustration with the MCC flame out on its own. They don't talk about it so as not to stoke the flames. Apathy will set in among those who bought it. People will forget. Their anger will subside as it always does. They will become distracted by other issues inside or outside of the industry, more or less significant than this cause. We have to keep reopening the wound. If you look at the net neutrality debate, which I'm sure you've probably heard of, it took months of sustained anger to force the FCC to reverse its position. There was the initial outrage when the FCC's proposed rules were announced. The outrage was reignited when John Oliver ran his segment on it. There were hundreds of thousands of comments and letters and messages delivered to the FCC, and still they did not change their position. And then finally, the president himself, who had no actual authority over the FCC as it is an independent agency, but feeling the pressure from his base, came out against the rules as well, and only then, after months and months of outrage and the efforts of a TV host and a nation and a president, did the FCC reverse its rules. The campaign was won, but it took a lot of time and sustained pressure from several angles over that time. That's the only way meaningful change can ever be accomplished. We have to keep reopening the wound. We have to remind people again and again and again why they were angry and just how angry they were, and how unfair it all was. If we fail in this, then 6 months from now, it will be a non-issue and a distant memory. The status quo will be maintained. Business as usual will continue. I wanted to give a brief sort of TLDR, perhaps a better term would be TLDW, too long didn't watch, of the last video. For one, so that everyone is on the same page about what we're talking about in this video, and also because it seems like a lot of people who perhaps didn't have the stamina to finish that hour-long video, understandably, or just couldn't stomach more than 10 seconds of my hyper-confrontational attitude, or perhaps just didn't come across it at all. I see you guys spreading the Save MCC First hashtag, the word around. I really appreciate that. I think it's really cool. But I noticed that without the context of the last video, there are a lot of people who are seemingly under the impression that we're demanding they fix the MCC. And no, I cannot emphasize enough that I understand the game is fixed, but the length and severity of its broken launch has inflicted a permanent wound on player populations. And for those of you who have helped spread the word about this problem, I encourage you to use this brief TLDR as a talking point whenever someone calls you a fucking dumbass for posting the hashtag because, and I quote, "the game is already fixed, you fucking hater. Shut up if you don't like it, don't play it," end quote. Now, what are the implications of low populations for the game itself? For one thing, everyone should stop bitching about 343 putting in ranks. They won't make much of a difference at this point. This means the frustrating amount of hopeless blowout matches and rage quitters is going to remain the status quo. I know they said they're eventually going to put penalties in for quitting. I don't think that's the answer. I think quitting penalties are just going to hurt the game's population even more because it's not addressing the underlying problems of why people are quitting. If it's a completely mismatched game, if the teams are completely mismatched in terms of skill levels and one team is just getting destroyed, we can't be that surprised when, somebody's having zero fun and they quit. And then penalizing them for that further is just going to make the wound that much worse. Penalizing quitting, I agree quitting is a huge problem. Penalizing quitting is not the way to solve it, period. Secondly, paid DLC is no longer an option for this game, alright? We are not going to see any meaningful amount of content, assuming we fail in our efforts to save MCC first. We're not going to see any new meaningful amount of content updates to this game because any further playlist dilution by separating those who bought it and those who didn't would have adverse effects for both groups of players. Thirdly, things like Team Snipers, Team SWAT, Team Doubles will probably never have a permanent spot in the playlists. People keep requesting these. It's just not going to happen. There's just not enough people online to fill them. I see 343 teasing, we're going to put SWAT back in the rotation, and if enough people play it, we'll keep it there permanently, but I don't think enough people are going to play it for them to put it in there permanently. I think they're just sort of trying to tamper down people's frustrations with words, but words are wind. Fourthly, matchmaking times are going to get longer and longer as time goes on. Most players outside of the US cannot play multiplayer at this point. I've heard from a lot of Australian and UK players in the comment sections. Most players outside of the US are having a very difficult time finding any matches at all, and that's what's going to slowly start happening to those of us in North America as well. Fifthly, the rate of in-game lag and matches lagging out altogether is going to increase, and by the time everyone is on summer break, most of the playlists outside of H2A, Team Slayer, and BTB are going to be mostly obsolete and largely unplayable most times of the day, and especially on weekdays. So that's sort of a brief TLDR. Use that when you're making the arguments to other people. That's the entire video, put in as short a way as I can. I apologize that these videos have to always be so long. The reason for this is that I have to neutralize all the counter arguments, right? I know people are going to make a lot of counter arguments in the comments, so if I say 343 isn't providing adequate support, I have to play him for the fact that some motherfucker is going to be like, they're giving us ODST for free, you're a giant crybaby. I have to make the argument about why ODST is not adequate compensation and they should do more. And a lot of the time, the counter arguments people make in the comments are clearly driven by a complete lack of understanding about what I'm trying to say. So I have to really explain every detail thoroughly, and I apologize if because of that I'm sometimes a bit long-winded. I'm on a desperate crusade to win hearts and minds here, people. I have to be aggressive about this. So I wanted to take this opportunity to go over some of the things that we can all do to help apply pressure to 343 to deliver on a lot of the stuff I talked about in the last video, and what we can do to revive or at least stem the bleeding of the MCC's playlist populations. A really cool idea I saw in the comments that I think could go a long ways just towards raising awareness of the problem of low playlist populations itself is if in-game on the MCC, those of you who support the Save MCC First cause switched your player clan tag to Save MCC First. Alright, I know a lot of you have had things like 343 Bola, 343 Sucks, Fix the Game, Failed to Connect. I've seen a lot of those in-game on the MCC. More productive, constructive strategy would be Save MCC First, I think. And also, let's talk about ODST here for a second. Why are we not getting ODST Firefight for the free compensation? I saw a really interesting post that made a strong argument about why not putting in Firefight is basically a slap in the face. Once you've built the ODST campaign, you've built ODST Firefight. The Firefight maps are selected areas ripped out of the campaign, and I'm just going to quote the post I read, and I'll link it in the description if you're interested, but I quote, "It is literally the same networking with the same base AI. The reason your character equips as you play Firefight is because they're still running the campaign NPC dialogue engine for killing enemies. Getting Firefight to run in development terms is almost free once the ODST campaign engine is up and running on the Xbox One. Fun fact, the modes are so similar that someone accidentally swapped the metadata for Rally's Point campaign and Firefight versions. The game still complied and ran, and nobody noticed the results of this mistake until the game came out." So literally the Firefight map was running in the campaign, and it was so similar that it didn't even mess up the campaign code. This is what I'm talking about when I say 343 is only doing the absolute bare minimum for this game. All they would have to do is put in a playlist, which might be sort of difficult because the original ODST didn't have matchmaking. It was, they would have to develop a matchmaking system for it and program the AI waves. There would be some netcoding work that had to be done, but it would be so easy. But they're like, nah, fuck that. Or it might be that they themselves are worried about playlist populations and don't want to put in Firefight because Firefight is an addictive playlist and a bunch of people would be playing it all the time and it would dilute the shit out of multiplayer. That's the other thing about low playlist populations. You know, it really limits a lot of the options that the devs have as far as adding stuff goes, because now they have to worry about diluting the playlist. Like I talked about in the last con, they can't do paid DLC because that would cut the playlist populations in half. They've backed this game into a corner, and instead of fighting their way out of it, they're content to let it die so long as everybody thinks they tried their hardest, when really they didn't because they're too lazy to even put in Firefight. Or maybe they've come to terms with the fact that they're too incompetent to put new playlists into the game without breaking everything all over again. Anyways, the For the Win query of the day is what makes Halo as a franchise, as a story, as an experience, as a set of memories. What makes it special to you? Please be sure to rate the video. This is Batman, signing out.
This armor suits you, but it cannot hide that mark.
Nothing ever will. You are the arbiter,
The will of the prophets.
but these are my elites. Their lives matter to me, yours does not. That makes two of us.